Richard Stowe threw the envelope at her. Not handed, threw. It skidded across the nursing station counter and hit the coffee cup, and the coffee went everywhere, and he didn't look at it. "Room 12, he said. "The animal is gone by 8, or I call the city marshal, and we do this the ugly way." He pointed at Sarah without looking at her. "And if you come back without confirmation, I will have your license reviewed by end of week. Are we clear?" He walked out before she could answer. The envelope sat in a puddle of coffee. Inside it was an order that would destroy him. If that just made your blood boil, you're exactly where you need to be. Hit subscribe right now and stay with me to the very end, because what happens inside Denver Memorial this morning is something none of them saw coming, and the man who threw that envelope is going to wish he never walked onto this floor. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Sarah Calloway read the order once, folded it, slid it into the left pocket of her scrubs, the same pocket where she kept her trauma shears. Some things needed to stay close to the tools you used when everything went wrong. She walked toward room 12. Ghost was the first thing she saw. Belgian Malinois, male, tactical vest, charcoal gray, the patch on his left shoulder reading MWD in gold letters. 70+ pounds of absolute stillness beside the bed. Not the stillness of rest, the stillness of total attention. He looked at her the moment she crossed the threshold, and she felt it. That specific calibration, that deliberate reading of a person against a database of cleared and not cleared. She had been looked at that way before, in other places, under circumstances that had nothing to do with a hospital in Denver on a Tuesday morning. She kept her face neutral, and she kept walking. Colonel Marcus Hale was 41, both legs wrapped ankle to mid-thigh, hardware in his right knee that would trigger metal detectors for the rest of his life. Delta Force. Walter Reed transfer. He was watching her before she cleared the doorway. Eyes to her hands first, then her badge, then her face. That order. The order of a man who had spent enough time in places where reading a stranger wrong meant not coming home. Sarah had that same order. She had spent 4 years making sure no one noticed. "Good morning, Colonel." Even, controlled. The voice she had built over 8 years of work in environments where how you sounded was the difference between people following you and people freezing. Morning. One word, no waste. Ghost did not react to her entry. She did not let herself react to that. Reacting would mean explaining why she knew what it meant, and she was not ready to have that conversation. She checked the IV line, checked the drainage on his left dressing, made the chart notation. Routine. Invisible. 3 years of invisible on this floor, and she was good at it. "You're the one Stowe sent." Not a question. "I have a message from the administrative office." "I know what the message is." He looked at her with the particular patience of someone who has been lied to by institutions enough times to recognize the shape of it before the words came. "They want Ghost out." The request cites hospital liability policy regarding animals in non-designated care areas. He's not an animal. Flat, not loud. The quiet that lived underneath anger and was more dangerous than anger because it didn't need to announce itself. He has more operational hours in hostile environments than every surgeon on this floor has clinical hours combined. You want to talk about liability? Talk to me about what happens to a combat veteran with a traumatic brain injury when you remove his service animal in an unfamiliar environment. Talk to me about that liability. Sarah said nothing. She was aware of Ghost turning his head toward her. She kept her eyes on the chart. "How long have you been on this floor?" Hale asked. 3 years. "Before that?" She met his gaze for 2 seconds exactly. "Before that isn't relevant to your discharge planning, Colonel." Something shifted in his face. Not softening, recalibration. He had expected compliance or pushback. She had given him neither, and he recognized that the way a person recognized a technique they use themselves. "Fair enough," he said. She moved toward the door. "Nurse Calloway?" She stopped without turning. The dog stays. Whatever Stowe decides to do about it is between him and my JAG officer." She walked out. Stowe was in the hallway, still there. He had not gone back to the 14th floor. That was its own kind of answer about the kind of man he was. One who needed to watch his orders land, who needed the confirmation that the person he sent had come back carrying his authority intact. He was 56 years old, in a charcoal suit on a trauma floor where people arrived bleeding. And that single detail said everything Sarah needed to know about a man who confused running a hospital with owning the people inside it. "Well," he said. He declined. He mentioned his JAG officer. Stowe's jaw moved, not speech. The compression of a man recalibrating how hard he needed to push. "The dog is a liability. One family member files a complaint, and we are looking at legal exposure that no amount of military sympathy covers in court. Ghost has never had an incident on this floor." Stowe looked at her. She had said it without challenge, without inflection, as a documented fact. The kind of fact that doesn't need a raised voice because it has the weight of being true. "I am not asking for your assessment of the dog's behavioral record, Nurse Calloway." Half a register lower. The register men like him saved for moments when they wanted you to understand the distance between your position and theirs. "I'm telling you to go back into that room and make it clear to Colonel Hale that this is not a negotiation. That dog leaves today, and if Hale doesn't cooperate, he is transferred back to Walter Reed before end of shift." He let that sit. "Are we clear?" She held his gaze. 3 years of this exact moment with this exact kind of man. Men who use the phrase legal exposure in hallways where people were still bleeding from the night before. Men who had never been in a room where the wrong word meant a body count. "I'll relay the message," she said. She turned and walked. Behind her, she heard Stowe say something to the charge nurse, low, something about attitude and performance review cycles. She caught pieces of it. She didn't need all of it. She had been dismissed by people with considerably more power than Richard Stowe, in considerably more dangerous places, and it had never once slowed her down. She was 12 feet from room 12 when Ghost started barking. Her body stopped before her mind did. That was the first sign, the fact that her body knew before her brain caught up. 8 years of training doesn't disappear. It goes underneath, below the civilian layer, below the scrubs and the nursing certifications, and the carefully constructed ordinary life. It waits, and when the right sound reaches it, it answers faster than thought. Her pulse did not spike. Her hands did not move, but everything behind her eyes went somewhere specific and cold and very focused. Her gaze went to the corridor, the ceiling panels, the floor seams, the walls, then to the ventilation access panel on the north wall near the nurse's station, 12 feet back. Standard HVAC access, 6 Phillips head screws, 2 in the lower right corner were misaligned. Not the misalignment of age, not poor installation settling over years. The misalignment of a screw that had been removed and replaced in a hurry, in low light, by someone who did not know that a particular kind of eye would notice the difference. That kind of eye was standing 12 feet away from it right now. Sarah Calloway's mouth went dry. Inside room 12, Hale's voice. One word, sharp, command frequency. Ghost went silent instantly, but he didn't sit. He stood rigid, body-oriented like a fixed compass, pointing directly at that wall. She did not run. Running created panic. Panic created secondary casualties. She had learned that at 23 in a drainage ditch outside Fallujah with 8 inches of brown water and a device that could have leveled a structure, and she had never unlearned it because some lessons don't allow themselves to be forgotten. She walked to the charge station. She picked up the desk phone. She did not call security. She did not call administration. She dialed a number that existed in no hospital directory, a number she had not used in 5 years, a number she had sworn to herself on the day she arrived in Denver she would never need again. It rang twice. A voice answered. She said 4 words. I have a device. No name asked. 3 questions came back fast and clean. Location, confidence level, civilian exposure. Denver Memorial Trauma, Level 1, 91%, 52 staff, 9 patients, 2 pediatric rooms East Corridor, 1 ICU pod, 4 critical. A pause of 2 seconds. Hold position. Do not engage. Assets 11 minutes out. The line went dead. She set the receiver down without a sound. The med tech 3 feet to her left kept charting without looking up. 11 minutes. She had rendered safe a secondary device in Ramadi with a 4-minute window before a triggerman re-established line of sight. 11 minutes was workable. 11 minutes was also enough time for this entire floor to die if she stood here and waited, because a trained MWD does not false alert. Not one with Ghost's operational certification. Not one that had been through whatever those classified theater notations described. She walked back to room 12 and pushed the door open. Hale read her face in under 2 seconds. "Talk to me," he said. She closed the door, stood at the foot of his bed, looked at him with the same directness he had used on her all morning. "Ghost is alerting on the ventilation access panel. North wall, nurse's station, 12 feet from this room. I've made a call. Response is 10 minutes out. What kind of device? Don't know yet. Haven't approached. Render safe experience?" There it was, the question inside the question. The one a Delta Force colonel only asked when he already suspected the answer was nothing like what a floor nurse would give. "Some," she said. He looked at her the way he had looked at her since she walked in that morning. That cataloging stillness. And this time, whatever he was calculating landed somewhere different. "What's your actual background?" She said nothing. "Ghost doesn't clear civilians," Hale said. "He assessed you when you walked in. He cleared you, not as a nurse." He looked at the dog, then back at her. "He cleared you as a known category, which means you've been in rooms with dogs like him before. In places that would explain exactly why you're standing there looking at me the way you're looking at me right now." The room was quiet. Down the hall, the fluorescent lights ran their low, continuous buzz. She had noticed that sound every morning for 3 years, and she still hadn't stopped hearing it. "I need to know what we're dealing with," she said. "This floor needs to be evacuated, but we cannot pull a fire alarm with an unidentified device in that wall. If someone opens that stairwell before I know what the trigger method is, we could have a secondary event in a space we can't control. People could die running." "You know what secondary events look like," he said, not a question. "I know exactly what they look like." A beat. He held her gaze. "Your MOS, he said. "I want your actual MOS." She looked at him for 3 full seconds. 71st EOD Team 3, Rangers Attachment, 3 tours, separated 5 years ago. Ghost looked at her. Hale looked at her. The room held that. Then Hale said one word to the dog. A command syllable, specific frequency. Not louder, just precise in a way that was not about volume. Ghost walked to Sarah's left side and sat. 9 minutes, she said. "Go," he said. She walked the corridor the way she had walked 100 approach paths before this one. Heel to toe, weight distributed, nothing in her body announcing what her mind was running at full speed. Ghost matched her exactly. 6 inches off her left leg, nose working in that low, continuous way that was the most sophisticated detection instrument on this floor and was completely invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. The med tech at the station looked up. "Everything okay?" "Just walking him. Colonel says he gets restless." The tech looked at Ghost. Ghost looked at the tech with the benign blankness of an animal trained to present as non-threatening to non-targets. The tech went back to charting. 4 feet from the panel, she stopped. Ghost stopped. His nose came forward and his ears went flat, and the alert deepened in a way she felt before she processed it. Not sound, certainty. The trained Absolute certainty of an animal that knew exactly what it had found. Here, it is here. She crouched, brought herself level with the panel, did not touch the screws, leaned close enough to smell, and there it was, beneath antiseptic and recycled building air. Faint, chemical, specific. The adhesive used to secure initiator components. Not factory ordnance, not military surplus. Assembled by hand. Built by someone who knew enough about device construction to build it, and not quite enough to account for a dog with this dog's certification level. Built to be found late, or not at all. She straightened. She pulled out her hospital pager and typed a message to the charge nurse. She had written the language in her head on the walk from room 12, because in EOD you planned your communication before you needed it, not during. HVAC maintenance flag for inspection. Request quiet floor protocol. No new admissions, North Corridor pending clearance. Routine. She sent it. She turned and walked back. She did not see the figure at the end of the East Corridor. Maintenance uniform. Badge clipped at the breast pocket. Legitimate, current quarter issue. But the hands inside the gloves were wrong. The stillness of someone who was not bored or tired, but waiting with the patience of a person who had sent a message and needed to know what came back. The figure watched Sarah walk into room 12. Watched the door close. Took out a phone. Dog alerted. EOD on floor. Abort or accelerate. 38 seconds. Accelerate. The figure pocketed the phone and started walking toward the North Corridor. She had 8 minutes when she walked back into the room. She had 7 minutes, 40 seconds when she knew 8 minutes was not going to be enough. Hale read it before she opened her mouth. Talk, he said. Initiator compound, assembled device, not surplus. She moved to the window, ground level, service entrance, loading dock. There's a second individual on the floor, East Corridor, maintenance uniform, badges real, hands are wrong. She turned back. Someone got the accelerate message. They're already moving. Hale's entire body changed. Not visibly, she saw it anyway. The subtraction of doubt. The arrival of complete operational clarity. Inside job, he said. Real badge means inside access. Planted overnight. Shift change window between 2 and 4 a.m. That's when North Corridor traffic bottoms out. He reached for the bed rail. Don't, she said. He stopped. No argument. He understood the math. Your legs are not an asset right now. What I need from you is your radio. Whatever you kept when they transferred you. I know you kept something. 1 second. He reached under the mattress and produced a compact satellite communicator. Military issue. No civilian hospital inventory sheet in existence listed it. She took it. She keyed the frequencies she still knew from memory, the frequencies she had not used in 5 years, the one that lived in the part of her brain that did not erase things regardless of how hard she pushed. EOD-3 Alpha to assets inbound. Second individual confirmed on floor. East Corridor, maintenance cover. Devices live, initiator present, trigger method unknown. Request updated ETA and perimeter status. Static. Then a voice she didn't know, but whose cadence she recognized completely. Someone running towards something while speaking calmly about it. EOD-3 Alpha, assets 8 minutes out. Perimeter is soft. Repeat, soft. Local PD not fully briefed. You are primary on floor. Authorization to act. She keyed off. 8 minutes. Second individual reaches that panel in 4, Hale said. Maybe less if he accelerates. What's the trigger method risk? Remote detonation most likely given the compound and the panel position. But if this is a manual trigger, if he's the detonator, he needs 30 seconds at that wall and no phone required. She looked at the door. He looked at the door. Ghost looked at the door. I have to go back out there, she said. I know, he said. She moved to the door, stopped. If this goes wrong, Ghost needs to go with the response team when they arrive. Handler documentation is in the left pocket of his vest. Make sure he gets routed through the right channel or he ends up in a civilian shelter. Hale stared at her. Nothing is going to go wrong. That's what my team leader said in Ramadi. She looked at him once more. He was right that time. I'm hoping that pattern holds. She opened the door and walked out. The figure in the maintenance uniform was 20 feet from the nurse's station. Moving unhurried, practiced, the walk of someone who had rehearsed belonging on this floor until it felt like memory. Sarah ran the geometry without breaking stride. 20 feet to the station, 12 feet station to panel, 4 minutes at current pace, maybe less. She angled across the corridor toward the medication cart outside room 9. Purposeful, efficient, a nurse going from one task to the next, invisible, the way she had been invisible for 3 years, the way she was about to use that invisibility for the last time. She opened the cart drawer. Her hands did not shake. They had never shaken. Not the first time, not at 23 in that drainage ditch. Not ever. She had understood early that fear and physical function were not the same system. Fear was the noise. The hands were the instrument. You could let the noise run and still play the instrument correctly if you had trained the separation long enough. 7 years had been long enough. She took a trauma tourniquet from the drawer and put it in her left pocket, closed the cart, looked up. The figure had stopped. He was looking at her, not the glance of a stranger, the look of someone doing the same calculation from the opposite direction, reading her position relative to the panel, reading her pace, reading the fact that she had stopped exactly where she had stopped for a reason that had nothing to do with that cart. He knew. 1 second of eye contact. Then she walked directly toward him. He moved first. Not toward the panel, toward her. The specific operational decision of someone whose objective had just shifted from device to witness. A compromised device was recoverable. A compromised identity was not. 3 seconds before he closed the distance, she used every one. The IV pole outside room 11. Stainless steel, 6 feet, weighted base. She didn't grab it as a weapon. She pulled it into his path as she stepped left. Not a swing. Geometry. He hit it mid-stride. Not enough to go down, enough to break his momentum. She used that half second. Inside his reach. The way EOD personnel got inside the danger radius of a device, not by retreating, by closing distance past the point where the physics changed in your favor. Left hand to his right wrist, right elbow to the nerve cluster below his shoulder. No more force than the technique required. Excessive force in a confined corridor with patients behind every door was its own category of failure. He went to one knee, recovered faster than a civilian. She felt that immediately, the training in him, the muscle memory of someone who had been taught. He tried to rotate out of the wrist lock. She changed the angle from rotational to compressive and applied pressure in a direction that joint was not designed to travel. He stopped moving. The med tech at the station was on her feet. A family member in the hall had frozen completely, paper coffee cup suspended halfway to her mouth. "Call a code gray." Sarah's voice was the voice she used to report vitals. Even, built for transmission under conditions that degraded everything else. Active security threat, North Corridor. Do it now. Do not pull the fire alarm. Do not open the stairwell doors. Code gray only. The tech reached for the phone without a single word. Sarah looked down at the figure on the floor. He had stopped resisting. He was breathing. "The device isn't going to help you now," she said quietly. "And whoever sent you that accelerate message isn't coming. The people who are coming, you don't want to be mobile when they arrive. I'm telling you that as someone who knows exactly who they are." He said nothing. The PA clicked on. The charge nurse's voice came through, neutral, professional. "Code Gray, North Corridor. Code Gray, North Corridor. All non-essential personnel, please clear the area. This is not a drill." 41 seconds later, the stairwell door opened. Quietly. The way people who had done this many times opened doors in active situations. 4 individuals, dark clothing, equipment she recognized by shape and carry method before they were fully through the door. The lead looked at her, at the figure on the floor, at her grip on his wrist, said one word, Calloway. She had not heard her name said that way in 5 years, not as a name, as a confirmed coordinate. Panel is north wall, nurse's station, 12 feet, she said. Initiator present, trigger method unconfirmed. No secondary device confirmed, but sweep the entire floor before you assume anything. Already moving before she finished. The device was rendered safe at 7:58 a.m. She knew the exact time because she was watching the clock above the station when the lead operative keyed her radio and said the 2 words that still arrived in Sarah's chest, exactly as they always had. Same physical release. Same unwinding of something held at maximum tension since the moment Ghost first went rigid in that corridor. All clear. She exhaled through her nose, slow, controlled. Not relief, discipline. Relief was a physiological event that compromised your assessment of an environment that was never fully clear until every room had been swept and every person accounted for and every exit confirmed. The lead operative stopped beside her 30 seconds later. Special Agent Diana Reeves, Defense Intelligence Agency. The call Sarah had made that morning had gone further up the chain than she had expected and had pulled assets from a tier she had not anticipated. She filed that. Floor is clear, Reeves said. Pressure plate with cell detonation primary and a mechanical failsafe. Whoever assembled it added a backup trigger. If someone had opened that panel without knowing what they were looking at, it would have gone regardless of phone signal. Sarah absorbed that. Blast radius. Contained to North Corridor. TATP derivative. Contained doesn't mean survivable within 40 feet. She looked down the corridor. 40 feet covered room 12. She said nothing about that. The individual in custody, she said. Do you have an ID? Reeves looked at her with the expression of someone deciding how much to give. Enough to establish this wasn't random. This floor was targeted specifically. A pause with weight behind it. Colonel Hale was the objective. Sarah had already known. A Delta Force colonel with classified operational history transferred to a civilian trauma center, location logged in a hospital database that was by design more accessible than any military medical record. Someone had found him and decided a ventilation panel was the cleaner solution. How did they get the badge? Night maintenance contractor, third-party vendor, staff member was approached 3 weeks ago. Financial coercion. He didn't know what the badge was for. He's cooperating. And the device builder. That's a longer conversation. Reeves looked at her steadily, and her voice changed register, just slightly, the way voices changed when they were about to deliver information that had weight. Which brings me to the part of this morning I need to talk to you about, Staff Sergeant Calloway. The title landed in the corridor between them like something solid. She had not been called that in 5 years. She held Reeves's gaze, and she waited. The call you made this morning, Reeves said, came in on a frequency that was officially decommissioned 16 months ago. A pause. Which means you've been maintaining a communication protocol for an operation classified as closed and sealed. Her eyes didn't move from Sarah's face. I need to understand why you still had it. Sarah looked down the corridor, at the panel, at the marks on the floor where the figure had gone down, at the IV pole still slightly out of alignment from where she had pulled it. Old habits, she said. Reeves studied her for a long moment. Then she placed her hand on the folder under her arm, the one she had been carrying since she walked through that stairwell door, and she said, I need you in the conference room, 2nd floor, right now. She paused. And Sarah, you're going to want to see what's in this folder. I promise you that. Sarah looked back at room 12. Through the small rectangular window in the door, Hale was watching her. Ghost stood beside him. tail moving, barely, for the first time all morning. She turned back to Reeves. There was a name in that folder she hadn't heard spoken out loud in 5 years. She already knew it. She didn't know how she knew, she just did. The same way her body had known before her mind caught up when Ghost started barking. The same way her hands had always known what to do when the noise got loud enough that nothing else could be heard. "Lead the way," she said. The conference room on the second floor smelled like recycled air and old decisions. Reeves set the folder on the table and did not open it. She sat across from Sarah and placed both hands flat on the surface, the way people did when they wanted you to understand that what came next was not a conversation you could walk away from easily. 8:11 a.m. "Before I show you what's in here," Reeves said, "I need to know something." She looked at Sarah with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who had conducted enough of these conversations to know that how a person answered the first question told you everything about how the rest of it would go. "The number you called this morning, the frequency, who gave it to you?" "No one gave it to me," Sarah said. "I memorized it during an operation. I kept it because I'm the kind of person who keeps things like that." "What operation?" Sarah held her gaze. "You already know the answer to that, or we wouldn't be in this room." Reeves looked at her for 3 seconds. Then she opened the folder. She turned it to face Sarah and slid it across the table. 7 names, printed on a single sheet, no letterhead, no classification markings visible. 7 names, and beside each one a date and a location, and a single word that appeared in the same column for every entry. The word was targeted. Sarah read the first name. She knew him. Sergeant Major Dale Coffin, retired. Fayetteville, North Carolina. Date, 6 weeks ago. She read the second. Captain Leanne Voss, active reserve. Virginia Beach, 5 weeks ago. She read the third. Warrant Officer Thomas Pack, Tacoma, Washington, 3 weeks ago. She stopped at the fourth name. She looked at Reeves. "Pack didn't survive," Reeves said. Her voice was even, informational. The voice of someone delivering facts to a person trained to receive facts without flinching, which was a form of respect. Coffin and Voss both sustained injuries. Both survived. A pause. The Tacoma incident was what connected the three. Before that, we were looking at isolated events. "What connected them?" Sarah asked. "Operational history, specific theater, specific window." Reeves leaned forward slightly. "Eastern Syria, Deir ez-Zor province, 2018 to 2019. Sarah put both hands in her lap. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and felt the fabric of her scrubs, and counted the pressure points the way she had learned to ground herself in moments when the information coming in was moving faster than the ability to process it cleanly. "Operation Iron Gate," she said. The words came out level. She made sure of it. "Yes. Iron Gate, 14 months in eastern Syria, attached to a joint task force running render-safe operations on IED networks, supplying material to 3 separate insurgent factions simultaneously. SEAL elements, Delta operators, ACIA forward team, and EOD Team 3 Rangers attachment, with a staff sergeant named Sarah, who had rendered safe 19 devices in 14 months and had been correct on all 19. The 20th had been different. She looked at the remaining names on the list. She read them one by one. She knew 4 personally. The 5th was someone she had heard of but never met in theater. The 6th she had to read twice because she hadn't seen it in 5 years, and her brain resisted it the way the body resisted cold water, with an involuntary full system refusal that lasted only a second but was total while it lasted. The 7th name was hers, not Sarah Calloway, her original name. The name on her service record, on her separation papers, on the classified debrief documentation from a building without windows where she had sat across from 2 people she had never seen before and answered questions about a device she would spend the next 5 years reviewing, in the specific way that mistakes made in the dark came back in the dark. She looked at Reeves. How long have I been on this list? We believe you were identified approximately 7 weeks ago. And you didn't warn me. We didn't know you were here, Reeves said. Not defensive, just factual. The legal name change was thorough. You weren't in any database we were monitoring for protective purposes. We didn't connect your current identity to your service record until the frequency you used this morning came back to your original clearance file. She paused. The name change bought you 4 years. That's not nothing. Sarah looked at the window. The ordinary Tuesday morning outside it, the parking structure in the tree line, in the pale March sky above Denver, that had no awareness whatsoever of what had nearly happened on the 9th floor above it. They came here for Hale, she said. Yes. And found me. Yes. She looked back at the folder, at the 6 names above hers, and the specific arithmetic of a past she had tried to bury under 3 years of quiet hallways, and a name that was not the one she was born with. 6 other people, 6 other individuals who had been in Deir Azor during Iron Gate. 6 people who either already knew they were on this list or were living the same ordinary Tuesday morning she had been living 45 minutes ago, before a dog went rigid in a hospital corridor. Who else knows about the list? She asked. Within DIA, 3 people including myself. Outside DIA, as of this morning, you and Colonel Hale. Hale is on it? Reeves looked at her. Colonel Hale ran the SEAL element attached to your EOD team for the final 5 months of Iron Gate. A pause. He knew there was elevated threat before he transferred here. He was briefed at Walter Reed. Sarah absorbed that. She thought about Hale watching the door from his bed, about the satellite communicator under the mattress, about the way he had handed it to her without hesitation when she asked, the way you handed something to someone you had already decided to trust, even though you couldn't have explained the decision yet. He had come here knowing, and he had come anyway, because that was the kind of man he was, and because men like that didn't stop being the kind of men they were just because their legs were wrapped in surgical dressings. The individual in custody, Sarah said, the one from the corridor, has he been interviewed? He's being processed. Interview him now. Ask him who gave him the hospital badge contact. The staff member who was coerced. Ask him who made the introduction. Ask him who he reported to after the accelerate message was sent. She kept her voice even. That answer is the most important thing in this building right now. Reeves studied her. Then she picked up her radio and stepped to the far corner of the room and spoke quietly into it. Sarah looked at the folder, at her own name at the bottom of the list. She thought about the 20 devices, about the 14 months, about the specific silence of eastern Syria at 3 a.m. when the only sound was wind off the desert and the low voices of the forward team running comms checks in the dark. She thought about the 20th device, not the 19th, the 20th, the one she had approached with full confidence because the intelligence assessment had been clean, had been verified, had come from a source she trusted completely. The assessment that said single trigger, pressure plate, no secondary. The assessment she had confirmed with her own initial sweep and had believed because it matched what she was seeing and because the man who provided it had never once been wrong in 14 months. She had been wrong about that last part. 8:19 a.m. Reeves came back to the table. He's being interviewed now. She sat down. There's something else in the folder. She reached in and produced a second sheet. This one had a photograph clipped to the upper right corner. A man, mid-40s, unremarkable face, the kind of face that was specifically designed to be unremarkable, to pass a 3-second glance in any environment without registering. She had seen that face in briefings, in situation rooms, in the specific context of a joint operation in eastern Syria, where he had sat across a folding table in a forward staging area and delivered intelligence assessments with the calm, precise authority of someone who had been doing this long enough to never need to perform certainty because certainty was simply the state he operated from. Carter Briggs, DIA analyst, Iron Gate liaison, the man who had coordinated intelligence between her EOD team and the Joint Task Force for 14 months. The man who had provided the assessment on Device 20. He's been identified as a person of interest, Reeves said carefully. We have circumstantial connections between Briggs and all 3 prior incidents. Nothing prosecutable yet, but enough to— Where is he now? Sarah asked. Under protective surveillance, a safe house in Colorado Springs. Reeves looked at her steadily. He doesn't know he's a person of interest. As far as he knows, he's being kept in a secure location as a potential target. Sarah said nothing. She was looking at the photograph, at the unremarkable face, at the eyes in it, which she remembered now with the specific clarity of things the brain chose to store at full resolution, because some part of it knew they would be needed later. She thought about Device 20, about the assessment that had been clean and verified, about the secondary trigger she had not found on her initial sweep, about the 11 seconds of hesitation between her declaration of render safe and the detonation. 11 seconds during which Sergeant First Class Kevin Rowe had been standing at the edge of the established safety perimeter, because the assessment had said single trigger and the perimeter had been calculated accordingly. 11 seconds. Kevin Rowe had been 33 years old. He had a son named Jacob, who had been 6 at the time, who was 11 now, who had grown up without a father because Sarah Calloway had trusted an intelligence assessment that had been wrong, or had been made to be wrong. She looked at Reeves. The assessment Briggs provided on Device 20, she said, the render-safe assessment that established the perimeter for the final approach. Is that document still in the classified archive? Reeves went very still. Yes. Has anyone pulled it since the incident started? A pause that lasted 2 seconds too long. No. Pull it, Sarah said. Pull it right now. Compare the assessed trigger configuration against the post-incident forensic report. She kept her voice completely flat. I think you're going to find a discrepancy, and I think that discrepancy is going to tell you that the assessment wasn't wrong because of bad intelligence. She looked at the photograph of Carter Briggs. It was wrong because it was written that way. The silence in the room had a different quality now. Reeves sat completely still, and Sarah watched something move through the agent's expression. Not surprise exactly, something more like the particular look of a person hearing out loud for the first time a thing they had already been circling without being willing to land on it. If that's true, Reeves said slowly, Kevin Rowe's death was deliberate, Sarah said. The words came out flat and total, and without any performance because they were simply true, and the truth of them had been sitting in a part of her she didn't visit for 5 years, waiting for the moment she was ready to look at it directly. He found out something about Iron Gate, something Briggs needed contained. And Briggs used me to do it because I was the EOD specialist on the team, and because he knew I would follow protocol and trust his assessment, and because when it went wrong, he knew I would blame myself and leave. She paused, and I did exactly what he counted on, all of it. Reeves picked up her radio again. This time she didn't move to the corner of the room. She sat right where she was and called in 2 separate requests in quick succession. Pull the Iron Gate device assessment archive, document number, she recited from memory, and hold all communication to and from the Colorado Springs safe house, pending further instruction. When she put the radio down, she looked at Sarah for a long moment. You've been sitting on this for 5 years, she said. I didn't know I was sitting on it, Sarah said. I thought I made a mistake. I thought I missed a secondary trigger because I trusted an assessment over my own physical read of the device. She looked at the folder. I blame myself because that's what you do when someone dies on your render safe. You look for what you did wrong. You find it. You carry it. A pause. Briggs counted on that too. 8:27 a.m. Reeves' radio crackled. She picked it up, listened, and her expression changed in a way that was small and controlled, but that Sarah read immediately because she had spent 8 years reading exactly that kind of controlled expression in exactly these kinds of rooms. Something had happened. What? Sarah said. Reeves set the radio down. The individual in custody, they completed the initial interview. She looked at Sarah with the steady, careful attention of someone about to hand over information they wished they weren't carrying. He was asked who made the introduction to the coerced staff member, who set up the badge contact. A pause. He gave a name. What name? Reeves looked at her. Briggs. The room went quiet in the way rooms went quiet when a pattern completed, when the last piece landed and the whole shape of it became visible at once. Not a gradual understanding, an arrival, total and immediate. Sarah had known it was coming from the moment she looked at the photograph. She had known it the way she had known Ghost Alert was real before she reached the panel. The body knew, the trained mind knew, and the part of her that had spent 5 years refusing to ask the question she had now finally asked knew too. Had always known, had been carrying it in the specific way you carried things you were not yet ready to look at. Where is Briggs right now? She said. Exactly. Colorado Springs. We have 2 agents on site. Call them. Sarah, call them right now and confirm he is physically in that building. Her voice had not risen. It had gone in the other direction. Quieter, steadier. The way it always went when the stakes went up, and the hands needed to be the instrument, and the noise needed to be managed. Because if Briggs set up the badge contact for this morning's device, then he knew this morning was going to happen, which means he knew the frequency I used to call it in, which means he knows I'm here. And if he knows I'm here, your surveillance detail in Colorado Springs is not what it looks like. Reeves was already reaching for the radio. She got 3 words out before the door opened. Sarah turned. The man in the doorway was wearing a visitor's badge. He had the unremarkable face from the photograph, the calm, precise authority of someone who had never needed to perform certainty because certainty was the state he operated from. He looked at Sarah with an expression that was almost something that could be called appreciative, the way someone looked when a subordinate had performed beyond expectation. You always were the fastest one in any room, Carter Briggs said. Reeves was on her feet. Her hand went to her side. Briggs raised one hand, open, unhurried. Easy, he said. I'm unarmed. I'm here because I want to talk. His eyes didn't move from Sarah's face, specifically to her. Sarah looked at him. She did not move. She did not look at Reeves. She looked at Briggs the way she had looked at every device she had ever approached, with total attention and zero performance in the specific kind of calm that was not the absence of awareness, but its sharpest possible form. Close the door, she said. Briggs smiled. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. You have about 45 seconds, Sarah said, before this room fills with people who are going to make the rest of your morning very complicated. So say what you came to say. Briggs looked at her. Then he looked at the folder on the table, at the 7 names on the sheet facing up, at the photograph of himself clipped to the second page. He looked at it the way someone looked at a hand of cards laid face up on the table, with the precise, unhurried assessment of a person calculating what remained playable. Kevin Rowe, he said. Sarah's hands were in her lap. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs, counted the pressure points. He discovered something about the operations funding structure, Briggs said, something that connected Iron Gate to a network that neither of us was supposed to know existed. He was going to report it. I had 72 hours. He paused. The device was the cleanest available option. You used me, Sarah said. Her voice was a flat line. No rise, no performance, just the words laid on the table beside the 7 names in the photograph. You were never meant to be harmed, he said. The secondary trigger had a directional component. You were positioned correctly for survival. Kevin Rowe wasn't. No, Briggs said, he wasn't. The room was very quiet. Sarah looked at the man who had handed her wrong intelligence 14 months into a classified operation in eastern Syria, and had then watched her blame herself for the consequence of it, and had done nothing to correct that, and had apparently continued doing nothing to correct it for 5 years, while 3 other people from that same operation were targeted and one of them died. She thought about Jacob Rowe, 11 years old now. She thought about what it meant that a 6-year-old had grown up to be 11 without a father, because a man was standing in this room explaining it as a cleanest available option. She looked at Briggs. The other names on this list, she said, Coffin, Voss, Pack. She let that last name sit in the air for a second. They found out too. Briggs said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. The door opened behind him. 2 agents came through it fast in total, and Briggs turned and raised both hands, and it was over in under 10 seconds. His hands behind his back, his credentials pulled, his body against the wall with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this enough times to do it without drama. Reeves looked at Sarah across the room. Her expression said several things at once, and the loudest of them was, "We need to move, and we need to move now." Because Briggs had walked through that door, which meant the surveillance detail in Colorado Springs had a hole in it, which meant whoever had sent Briggs here, whoever was above him in the chain that ran from Iron Gate through the badge contact and the accelerate message and the assembled device in the ventilation panel, had known about this morning before it happened, had planned around it, had used it. Sarah stood up. She looked at the folder. She reached out and picked up the sheet with the 7 names. She looked at her own name at the bottom of the list, the name she had chosen, the name she had built a quiet life inside of for 4 years. She folded it and put it in her left pocket. Next to the hospital order Stowe had thrown at her that morning, next to her trauma shears. Some things you kept close to the tools you used when everything went wrong. "Tell me what you need," she said to Reeves. Reeves didn't answer immediately. She was watching the 2 agents walk Briggs out of the conference room, her jaw set, her radio in her hand, and Sarah could see her running the same calculation Sarah was already 3 steps into. Briggs had walked through that door. That meant the Colorado Springs detail was compromised. That meant whoever was above Briggs in the chain had known this morning was going to happen and had positioned accordingly. That meant this was not over. 8:34 a.m. "What I need," Reeves said, "is for you to sit down for 5 minutes while I make 3 calls." "I don't need to sit down." "Sarah, make your calls, I'll stand here." Sarah looked at the door. "But I want to know the minute you confirm the Colorado Springs detail. Status of both agents on site." Reeves was already dialing. Sarah turned to the window. She pressed one hand flat against the glass and felt the cold of it against her palm, and looked out at the parking structure and the tree line and thought about Carter Briggs sitting in a chair 12 feet behind her, explaining Kevin Rowe's death the way you explained a procurement decision. Cleanest available option. As if the words themselves could be made neutral by the register you delivered them in. As if saying a thing calmly was the same as the thing being acceptable. She had spent 5 years believing she had failed Kevin Rowe. 5 years of reviewing a 20-device render-safe record and finding the 20th over and over again in the dark. Running back through every step of the approach, every reading of the physical evidence, every second of the 11-minute window between her initial sweep and the detonation, looking for what she had missed, carrying the weight of what she had missed, leaving the Army because the weight of what she had missed was the kind of weight that changed the geometry of everything around it. And the truth was, she hadn't missed anything. The assessment had been written to make her miss it. The secondary trigger had been there from the beginning, and the man who had told her it wasn't was standing 30 feet down the hall in custody and had just explained it to her in a voice that never once changed register. She didn't know what to do with that yet. She wasn't going to figure it out in the next 5 minutes. She put it where she put things she needed to process later, in the part of her that stored without reviewing, and she turned back to the room. Reeves had finished one call and was on the second. Her face had not changed, but her shoulders had, very slightly, in the direction that said the first call had not gone the way she wanted it to go. Sarah waited. 8:39 a.m. Reeves put the radio down. She looked at Sarah with the steady, direct attention of someone who had decided that the person across from her had earned the unmodified version of the truth. Colorado Springs detail is not responding, Reeves said. Sarah had already known it was coming. Knowing it was coming didn't make it land any lighter. Both agents? Both. How long since last check-in? 40 minutes. A pause. Which means Briggs wasn't running solo. He had support. Someone moved him out of Colorado Springs, neutralized the detail, and got him into this building while we were managing the device on 9. Someone who knew about the device? Yes. Someone who knew the device would pull us to 9 and leave the lower floors soft. Yes. Sarah looked at the folder still open on the table, at the 7 names, at the photograph of Briggs that was no longer relevant as a person of interest, because Briggs was now in custody, and the people above him in the chain had just demonstrated that they were willing to burn him to buy time. He walked in here, she said. He came directly to me. He wanted something. He wanted to know what was in the folder, how far we'd reconstructed the chain. He wanted more than that. Sarah looked at the door. He came to this room because he already knew we had him on the badge contact. He came because he was managing his own exposure. He wanted to understand exactly what I knew before whoever sent him decided whether to extract him or cut him. She paused. He was buying time, not for himself, for whoever is above him. Reeves was quiet for 2 seconds. We need to move you. No. The word came out flat and immediate. You move me and you announce to whoever is running this operation that we've identified the network above Briggs. Right now they don't know what we have. They think Briggs walked into this room and had a conversation and walked out. They don't know he's in custody. They don't know we pulled the device assessment from Iron Gate Archive. She looked at Reeves steadily. We have a window, small one. I want to use it. Reeves looked at her. The particular look of a senior agent evaluating a recommendation from someone who technically had no operational standing in this situation and was nevertheless the most operationally qualified person in the room. What are you thinking? Briggs said Rowe found something in the operations funding structure, something that connected Iron Gate to a network. That's what this is about, not the operation itself, the money behind it. Sarah tapped the folder. Everyone on this list was in Deir ez-Zor during the window, but not everyone on this list had access to funding documentation. Rowe did. What was his role? Reeves opened the folder to a third page Sarah hadn't seen yet. Logistics coordination. He managed material requisition for the Joint Task Force, all procurement, all supply chain, all financial authorization routing. He would have seen everything that moved in and out of the operation budget, Sarah said. Every vendor, every contract, every payment authorization. She looked at Reeves. What are the others on the list? Their roles? Reeves went through them. 3 of the 7 had been in logistics or supply-adjacent positions during Iron Gate. The other 3, including Hale and Sarah, had been in operational roles, but would have had incidental access to procurement records during the final months of the operation when the task force was consolidating. Someone was using Iron Gate funding to move money through the operations logistics chain, Sarah said. It was not a question. Rowe found it. Briggs was embedded to protect it. When Rowe was about to report it, Briggs used me to silence him and then spent the next 5 years identifying and eliminating anyone else who might have seen enough to connect the dots. She paused. 5 years, which means the network the money was flowing to is still operational, still being funded, and still has enough reach to run surveillance on classified personnel records, neutralize DIA protective details, and plant a device in a level 1 trauma center on 48 hours notice. The room was very quiet. 8:47 a.m. Reeves picked up her radio and made the third call Sarah had been waiting for since Briggs walked through the door. She gave 2 code sequences and a location reference, and then she said, "I need a full Iron Gate financial archive pull. Every procurement document, every payment authorization, every vendor contract from the entire 14-month window. I need it on a secure terminal in the next 30 minutes." She paused. "And I need protective relocation initiated for the 5 names on the active list. Not Colorado Springs. Separate locations, separate teams, no shared communication channels." She put the radio down. She looked at Sarah. "Hale is still on 9. I know. He needs to be moved. He knows that too." Sarah moved toward the door. "I'll talk to him." "Sarah," Reeves stopped her with a specific quality of voice that meant what followed was not optional information. "Whoever is running this operation identified you 7 weeks ago. They know you're here. They know you were in this building this morning when the device was called in. They know Briggs walked into this room." She paused. "They are going to calculate that this conversation happened, and they are going to act on that calculation. I know. Which means the window you mentioned is shorter than you think." "I know that too." Sarah looked at her. "That's why I'm not sitting down." She walked out of the conference room and took the stairs, not the elevator, because in buildings where things had recently gone wrong, you did not put yourself in a box with 1 exit and a mechanical failure point. She took the stairs the way she moved through every space now, heel to toe, eyes forward, aware of every door and every alcove and every person in her peripheral range. 9:02 a.m. The 9th floor had returned to something that looked like ordinary from a distance. Carts moving, monitors beeping, the charge nurse at the station with a phone to her ear, and the specific expression of someone managing the aftermath of an event the hospital's communication policy required her to describe as a resolved maintenance situation. The IV pole outside room 11 had been returned to its position. The ventilation panel on the north wall had a temporary maintenance seal over it that would look to most people like routine work. Sarah walked past the station. The tech looked up, said nothing, looked back down. Whatever the tech had seen that morning was still in the process of being filed into a category the brain could manage, which was a process that took longer than 45 minutes. And was not Sarah's responsibility to help with right now. She pushed open the door to room 12. Hale looked at her the way he had looked at her all morning, that steady cataloging attention, except now the calculation behind it was running on different information than it had been at 6:44 a.m. Ghost looked at her from beside the bed, and his tail moved once, the same barely there motion as before. The motion of an animal that had assessed a situation correctly from the beginning and was not surprised by how it had developed. "Briggs," Hale said, not a question. She stopped. "How do you know about Briggs?" "Because after you left this room the first time, I spent 20 minutes thinking about who had the access to coordinate a badge plant in a civilian hospital and the intelligence background to know which personnel from Iron Gate were worth targeting." He looked at her. Briggs was the only person who touched every element. The EOD assessments, the logistics coordination, the SEAL element briefings. He sat in on everything. He was the connection point between every team in the task force. A pause. "I should have said something sooner. You didn't have confirmation. Neither did you. Didn't stop you." She moved to the chair beside his bed and sat. Not the posture of comfort, the posture of a person who had decided the next conversation required stillness. "He's in custody." He confirmed Roe's death was deliberate. He confirmed the others on the list were targeted because they had access to the same information Roe found. She paused. "The Colorado Springs detail is not responding. Briggs had support getting into this building. Whoever is running this operation above him is still active, and they know this morning didn't go the way they planned." Hale's jaw was tight. "The list. 7 names, both of us, 5 others." She looked at him. "You knew you were on it before you transferred here." "I had a threat indicator, unverified, My Walter Reed contact flagged a surveillance pattern against my medical record access log. Someone had been querying my transfer documentation. He paused. I came anyway because sitting in a secure facility, waiting for an unverified threat to materialize, is not a posture I'm capable of maintaining for extended periods. I know, she said. She thought about the satellite communicator under the mattress, about the way he had handed it to her without hesitation, about the fact that he had been running his own calculation all morning and had arrived independently at the same place she had. Reeves wants to move you. I know she does. You should go. Probably. He looked at Ghost. What are you going to do? She had been thinking about that since she folded the sheet with 7 names and put it in her pocket next to her trauma shears. She had been thinking about it while Reeves made her calls. She had been thinking about it while she walked the stairs and moved through the corridor and pushed open this door. Reeves needs someone who knows the Iron Gate operational architecture from the inside, someone who can work through the financial documentation and identify the funding network Rowe found. She paused. Someone who was in Deir ez-Zor and understands how the task force was structured and where the money moved. That person is you, Hale said. That person is me. He looked at her for a long moment, not with a specific warmth of personal concern, though that was somewhere in it, with the recognition of one person who had been carrying something heavy for a long time, by someone who understood exactly how heavy that weight became when you carried it in the wrong direction, when you carried it as guilt instead of as obligation. Kevin Rowe, he said quietly. She held his gaze. You knew him. I knew him. 6 months in theater. Good man, precise. The kind of precise that made you trust him with things that mattered. He paused. I read the incident report after. The render safe assessment, the perimeter calculation, the forensic post-blast. I read it 3 times. And I thought the same thing I think you've thought about it every night for 5 years, he said. That the secondary trigger placement was inconsistent with the assessed configuration. That the perimeter should have been established differently if the assessment had been accurate. He paused. I filed a query with the archive 18 months ago, asked for the original assessment document for review. Sarah went still. What happened? The file was marked restricted access pending review, and I was told the review process would take 90 days. He looked at her. That was 18 months ago. The implication of that sat in the room between them like a third person. Someone had flagged that file. Someone inside the archive system had known that an active Delta Force colonel was asking questions about an Iron Gate device assessment and had moved to restrict access before he could read it, which meant the network protecting the operation above Briggs had reached inside the DIA archive, which meant Reeves' 30-minute request to pull the financial documentation was either going to produce results or was going to hit the same wall Hale had hit 18 months ago. 9:14 a.m., Sarah stood. I need to go back to Reeves. Sarah, she stopped. He reached to the bed rail and lifted something. The folded sheet of hospital letterhead. Stowe's order from that morning, delivered by an assistant who had no idea what morning it would become. You left this here. She looked at it. She didn't move toward it immediately. She thought about 6:44 a.m. and the envelope skidding across the counter and the coffee going everywhere and the man who had thrown it walking out before anyone could answer. She thought about 3 years of this floor, 3 years of keeping her head down and her voice low and her history underneath. And she thought about the fact that the morning that history had finally surfaced was the morning this floor had needed it more than it had ever needed a nurse who stayed quiet. She took the paper from his hand. Tell Reeves about the archive query, she said, the file restriction. She needs to know someone inside the system flagged it. Already planned on it. He looked at Ghost. He's going to want to come with you. She looked at the dog. Ghost looked back at her with those dark, steady eyes that had assessed her correctly from the very first second of the very first moment and had never once revised that assessment. She thought about what it meant that a dog trained for combat environments had cleared her as a known category before she had said a single word to his handler, had recognized something in her that 3 years of quiet hallways and a new name had not changed, and apparently could not change. "He works with you," she said. "He works with whoever I tell him to work with," Hale said, "and I'm telling him to work with you for the rest of this morning." She looked at Ghost one more time. Then she walked to the door and opened it, and Ghost came to her left side without a command, matching her pace exactly the way he had in the corridor 2 hours ago. 6 inches off her leg, his movement so precisely calibrated to hers that it felt less like the dog was following her and more like they were operating as a single unit that had been doing this for a long time. The corridor was quiet. She moved past the nurse's station, and the tech looked up and looked at Ghost and looked at Sarah and said nothing, because there was nothing in the current hospital vocabulary for what she was looking at. Sarah pushed through the stairwell door. 9:19 a.m. She was halfway down the stairs when her pager went off. Hospital issued. The message was from the charge nurse on 9, and it said 3 words that stopped her on the landing between floors 8 and 7, with Ghost pressing against her left leg and the stairwell door above her still settling back into its frame. Stowe. Administrative floor. Now. She read it twice. She thought about Richard Stowe in his charcoal suit throwing an envelope at a coffee cup that morning. She thought about him standing in the hallway waiting for confirmation that his order had landed. She thought about the fact that Reeves had said Briggs had support getting into the building, had said the Colorado Springs detail was neutralized, had said whoever was running this above Briggs was still active and moving. She thought about the hospital badge that had been used to plant a device on 9, issued by the hospital, current quarter, legitimate. She thought about who had access to current quarter badge issuance. She thought about the 14th floor. Ghost made a sound beside her. Not an alert, something lower, more immediate. The sound of an animal that had read a space correctly and was waiting for the person beside him to catch up. She caught up. She turned and went back up the stairs, not down, moving faster now, taking them 2 at a time, Ghost matching her without effort. And she pulled out her radio, not the hospital pager, the satellite communicator she had put in her right pocket after handing it back to Hale, and then taken again when he pressed it back into her hand on her way out the door. She keyed it. Reeves. A second. Go. The badge, Sarah said. She was still moving, still climbing. The current quarter hospital badge that was used to get the maintenance cover onto 9. Who authorized the issuance? A pause. 4 seconds. Then Reeves's voice came back, and it had the same quality it had when she told Sarah the Colorado Springs detail wasn't responding. The quality of a person delivering information they had just confirmed and wished they hadn't. Administrative authorization, Reeves said, issued 3 weeks ago, signed off by the hospital's chief operating officer under a routine contractor renewal. A pause. Stowe's office manages contractor badge issuance. All authorizations route through his executive assistant. Sarah stopped on the landing between 9 and 10. Where is Stowe right now? We have him in the administrative waiting area. He's been there since 8 a.m., 2 agents present. Check his phone, Sarah said. Right now, not a formal request. Have one of your agents look at his outgoing messages from the last 40 minutes. She kept her voice level. Check if he sent anything after Briggs walked into this building. The pause was longer this time. She heard Reeves on a secondary channel, the low, rapid exchange of someone relaying an instruction to someone in another location. And then silence. And then Reeves' voice came back, and it was very quiet and very precise in the way that voices got when the information was significant and needed to be carried carefully. 2 messages, Reeves said. Both outgoing, both in the last 35 minutes, both to the same number. A pause. Country code Eastern European. Sarah closed her eyes for 1 second. 1 full second. Then she opened them. Ghost was looking up at her with those dark, steady eyes, and she looked back at him, and she thought about a 6-year-old named Jacob, who was now 11, and who had grown up without a father, and who deserved to know that the people responsible for that were being held accountable. Not just the ones who had made the device, and not just the ones who had given the wrong intelligence, but the ones who had signed the authorization that let someone walk into a building with a real badge and an assembled device and nearly kill 52 people on a Tuesday morning. "Don't move, Stowe," she said. "Don't let him know you've seen the phone. I'm on my way down." She looked at Ghost. He looked at her. "And Reeves, the Iron Gate Financial Archive. When you requested that pull 30 minutes ago, did you get a confirmation?" The pause was its own answer. But Reeves gave her the words anyway. "Request is pending review," Reeves said. "Estimated processing time, 90 days. Sarah Calloway stood on the landing between floors 9 and 10, with a dog that had cleared her as a known category at first sight, and a satellite communicator in one hand, and the specific arithmetic of a network that had reached from a classified operation in eastern Syria to a hospital ventilation panel in Denver, and back out again through a charcoal-suited administrator on the 14th floor to a phone number in Eastern Europe. She understood now the full shape of it. Not every detail, but the structure, the load-bearing elements, the places where the weight was held, and the places where, if you applied pressure correctly, the whole thing would come down. She started moving again, down, toward Stowe, toward the rest of it. Ghost stayed at her left side and never once needed to be told where she was going. Stowe was sitting in a chair that was too low for a man accustomed to the 14th floor. That was the first thing Sarah noticed when she walked into the administrative waiting area on the ground level at 9:31 a.m. The chair was standard hospital issue, the kind designed for families in transition, not executives in crisis. And Stowe was sitting in it with his back straight and his hands on his knees, and the specific expression of a man who had decided that if he held his posture correctly, the situation would reclassify itself into something he could manage from a position of authority. 2 agents stood near the entrance. Neither of them was looking at him. That was deliberate. You didn't watch the person you were holding. You watched the exits. Watching the exits told the person you were holding that you were not interested in their performance, which was a more effective form of pressure than attention. Ghost came through the door at Sarah's left side, and Stowe's eyes went to the dog immediately, and something moved in his face. Not fear, something adjacent to it. The recognition of a situation that had moved beyond the category of things he knew how to handle. Sarah crossed the room and sat in the chair across from him. She did not bring paperwork. She did not bring the folder. She brought herself and the dog, and the specific quality of attention that she had spent 8 years developing in environments where reading a person correctly was not an analytical exercise, but a survival requirement. "Mr. Stowe," she said. He looked at her, then at Ghost, then back at her. "Nurse Calloway, I want to speak with my attorney." "You can do that," she said. "That's your right, and no one is going to stop you." She paused. "But I want to have a conversation with you first. Not as a legal matter, as a factual one." She kept her voice even, the voice she used to report vitals. "Because there are things happening in this building right now that you understand better than you're presenting. And the difference between what you tell me in the next 10 minutes and what an attorney tells you to say later is going to determine a significant number of things about how your day ends." Stowe's jaw moved. "I don't know what you think you—" "The badge," Sarah said. "The maintenance contractor badge issued 3 weeks ago through your office. Current quarter authorization, signed off under a routine contractor renewal." She watched his face, watched the specific compression that happened in the expression of a person who had believed their connection to an event was sufficiently indirect to be deniable, and was now understanding it was not. "Your executive assistant processed the paperwork. Your office authorized the issuance. The badge was used this morning to give a man access to a ventilation panel on the 9th floor containing an assembled explosive device." She paused. 3 patients on that floor are pediatric cases. They are between 6 and 9 years old. Stowe said nothing, but his hands moved on his knees. An involuntary adjustment of pressure, the body managing what the face was working to hold still. "I'm not asking if you built the device," Sarah said. "I'm asking if you knew what the badge was going to be used for." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Ghost. Ghost looked back at him with the dark, steady eyes of an animal that had been in enough rooms with enough wrong people to have developed a very precise read on the difference between someone who was frightened and someone who was guilty and someone who was both at once. "I want my attorney," Stowe said, but his voice had changed register. The register of authority had gone out of it entirely, and what was left was something smaller and more honest. "That's your right," Sarah said again. She stood up. She looked at him one more time. "The people who asked you to authorize that badge, Mr. Stowe, they sent a man into this building this morning to manage their exposure. Not to protect you, to manage their exposure." She paused. "That man is in custody, and the people above him are burning every contact they have right now to put distance between themselves and what happened on 9. She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "You should think about what that means for your position in this calculation before your attorney gets here." She walked out. 9:38 a.m. Reeves was in the corridor outside the waiting area with a second agent Sarah hadn't seen before. Younger, the specific alertness of someone who had been running on adrenaline since before 7 a.m. and had not yet started to feel it. "Anything?" Reeves said. "He's close," Sarah said. "He knows the badge connects him. He's calculating whether the attorney is a solution or an escalation." She looked at Reeves. "He's not the top of it. He's a node. Someone approached him, gave him a reason that wasn't the real reason, and he made a decision he is now understanding was a great deal more serious than it was presented to him." She paused. "Press the phone, the Eastern European number. That's your leverage point." Reeves nodded at the younger agent who moved back toward the waiting area. Then she looked at Sarah. "I need to talk to you about the archive." They moved to the small consultation room off the main corridor. Reeves pulled out a tablet and set it on the table, and Sarah looked at the screen. The Irongate Financial Archive request had not returned in the standard DIA system. Instead, it had flagged a cross-reference to a second classification layer that Reeves described as a black budget annex, meaning a funding structure that was not attached to any named operation in the standard record and was accessible only to personnel with a specific clearance addendum that Reeves had, but that most DIA analysts at Briggs's level would not have had. But Briggs had. "He had the clearance addendum?" Sarah said. "He was granted it 14 months into Irongate," Reeves said. 6 weeks before the 20th device. 6 weeks before Rowe died. She looked at Sarah. "The addendum gave him access to the black budget annex, which means he didn't just see the operation's standard funding, he saw the secondary structure, the network the money was actually flowing to." "He didn't find it," Sarah said. "He was managing it." "Yes," Sarah looked at the screen. "Pull everything in the annex that touches the Irongate window. Every transaction, every vendor code, every authorization signature." She looked at Reeves. "And I want to know who granted Briggs the clearance addendum. Who signed off on giving him access to the secondary funding layer?" Reeves typed. The screen populated. She went still. "What?" Sarah said. Reeves turned the tablet to face her. The clearance addendum authorization was signed by a deputy director of the DIA's Eastern Operations Division. The signature was dated 14 months into Irongate, consistent with what Reeves had said. Sarah read the name once, read it again. Then she put both hands flat on the table, the way Reeves had done in the conference room an hour ago, because some information required the physical act of grounding yourself before you responded to it. The name on the authorization was not a name she knew personally. It was a name she knew institutionally, a name that appeared in the operational briefing headers she had read during Irongate as the senior authority overseeing the Joint Task Force's intelligence coordination. A name that meant the network above Briggs was not a rogue element operating outside DIA oversight. It was DIA oversight. "How senior is this person currently?" Sarah asked. Reeves looked at her steadily. "Acting Deputy Director for Clandestine Operations," she said, "as of 8 months ago." The room was quiet. Ghost pressed against Sarah's left leg. She felt the warmth of him and the solid, specific weight of an animal who had decided that this was where he was supposed to be and was not moving. She pressed back slightly, not dramatically, just the small physical acknowledgement of the contact, and thought about what it meant that the person who had authorized Briggs's access to a covert funding network was now the second highest clandestine authority in the Defense Intelligence Agency. It meant the archive restriction on Hale's query 18 months ago had not been an accident or an overly cautious administrator. It had been a managed decision. Someone with authority had seen the query and had understood what it meant and had closed the door. It meant the Colorado Springs detail being neutralized was not a field operation by a rogue actor with limited resources. It was a sanctioned action by someone with the authority to move assets. It meant Reeves was operating against her own chain of command and may not have known it until this moment. Sarah looked at her. "Do you have a parallel reporting channel outside your standard chain?" Reeves was already there. "Inspector General," she said, "FBI Counterintelligence. I have a contact at the National Security Division." She pulled out a second phone, not her agency-issued one, a personal device. "I've been carrying this since PAC," she said, "since the Tacoma incident. I had a feeling the chain was compromised. I didn't know how high." She looked at the tablet. "Now I know." She dialed. The call connected in 2 rings, and she said 4 sentences, all of them precise and without editorializing. And then she gave a location and a time, and she said the name on the authorization document, and she said it needed to move to a secure channel immediately. She ended the call and put the personal phone in her jacket pocket. 30 minutes, she said. FBI Counterintelligence is standing up a parallel operation. Until then, we manage this room. 10:02 a.m. Sarah's hospital pager went off again. She looked at it. This message was from the 9th floor charge nurse, and it said 2 words. "Colonel, urgent." She looked at Reeves. "I need to go back to 9. I'll come with you." They moved through the corridor and up the stairs, Ghost between them, and Sarah ran through the possible reasons Hale had flagged her pager instead of using the satellite communicator. The most immediate reason was that the satellite communicator was a military frequency device, and using it from a hospital room in a building currently occupied by DIA personnel was a choice you only made if the DIA channel was the one you trusted. Hale had apparently decided something had changed about that calculus. She pushed through the 9th floor stairwell door and walked to room 12. Hale was sitting up in bed with a satellite communicator in his hand and an expression that Sarah had not seen on him before. Not the operational clarity of a man reclassifying a threat, something older and more specific. The expression of a person who had received information they had been waiting to receive for long enough that the arrival of it was its own kind of wound. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. Reeves stayed outside. "My Walter Reed contact just reached me on a channel I didn't give to anyone here," Hale said, "which means someone at Walter Reed has been feeding my location and communication activity to a party outside the standard chain." He paused. "The contact says my transfer paperwork to Denver Memorial was flagged by an Eastern Operations DIA authority 6 weeks ago. Not for security purposes, flagged for monitoring. My location, my treatment schedule, my daily activity log." He looked at Sarah. "Someone used my medical transfer as bait." She held his gaze. "The device wasn't just an attempt on your life," she said. "It was a controlled event. If it had detonated, the investigation into the cause would have been run by the Eastern Operations Division, the same authority that authorized Briggs' clearance addendum, The same authority that restricted your archive query 18 months ago. They would have investigated themselves, Hale said, and reached whatever conclusions were operationally convenient. She paused. Briggs walking into this building wasn't improvisation. He was sent here to assess the damage, to find out what Reeves had reconstructed, and report back before the counterintelligence response could be organized. She looked at him directly. They needed to know if the annex was exposed, if the deputy director's name was in play. Hale was quiet for 3 seconds. Is it? Reeves has it. FBI counterintelligence has it. The parallel channel is active. She paused. It's in play. He absorbed that. Ghost walked to him and pressed against the bedrail, and Hale put one hand on the dog's head with the automatic ease of a man and an animal who had been through enough together that the gesture required no thought. You know what this means, he said. It means the operation that Rowe died to expose didn't end when Iron Gate ended. It moved. It restructured. It embedded itself in the oversight layer that was supposed to investigate it. She paused. And it's been running for 5 years inside the institution that was supposed to stop it. The money, Hale said. The money is still moving. She looked at him. Rowe found the network. Briggs silenced him. But the network kept operating because there was no one left who had both the access and the understanding of the Iron Gate structure to reconstruct where the money was going. She paused. Until this morning. The room held that. 10:11 a.m. There's something I need to tell you, Hale said. His voice had changed. Not volume, weight. The specific weight of a thing that had been carried for a long time in a direction that was no longer the right direction. The 6th month of Iron Gate, before the 20th device, Rowe came to me. He looked at Sarah. He said he'd found something in the procurement records. He said the vendor codes for 3 separate supply contracts were routing payments to entities that didn't exist in any legitimate registry. Shell structures. He showed me the documentation. A pause. I told him to go through proper channels. I told him to submit a formal query to the Intelligence Coordination Office. Sarah looked at him. To Briggs. To Briggs. Because that was the proper channel. His jaw was tight. I told Kevin Rowe to take his evidence directly to the man who was managing the network he'd found. He looked at her steadily. I gave him the instruction that put him in the position Briggs needed him in. I didn't know that. I've spent 18 months knowing it. The room was quiet. Sarah thought about the 18 months Hale had been carrying that, about the archive query, about the way he had come to Denver Memorial anyway when the threat indicator came in, not because he was reckless, but because he had decided that the debt he owed Kevin Rowe required him to stay in motion rather than go to ground. You didn't know what Briggs was, she said. I know that. Rowe didn't come to you because you were his supervisor, she said. He came to you because he trusted you. And what you told him was correct procedure. You told him the right thing to do in an operation that wasn't corrupt. You couldn't have known the corruption was sitting in the oversight chair. Hale looked at her. Something in his face moved, not dramatically, not with the visible release of a man who had been absolved of something. More like the small internal shift of a weight being redistributed from the place it had been pressing to a place the frame was built to carry. The documentation Rowe showed me, he said, the vendor codes, the shell structure routing. He reached under the mattress again. Not the satellite communicator this time, a folded piece of paper that had been folded and refolded enough times to have the texture of fabric. He held it out to her. I photographed it before he submitted it. I didn't know why. Habit. I photograph things that feel like they might matter later. He paused. I've been carrying it for 5 years. Sarah took it. She unfolded it carefully, looked at what was on it. 3 columns of numbers, vendor codes, payment routing sequences, and beside each one, a series of alphanumeric identifiers that she recognized not as DIA standard coding, but as something older, something she had seen in operational documentation during the final weeks of Iron Gate, when the task force was consolidating records for archive submission. She looked up at Hale. These identifiers, this coding structure, this is not DIA. No, he said. This is NSA financial tracking format, she said. These are NSA monitoring codes. Someone inside NSA was tracking this network, had been tracking it. These identifiers mean the transactions were being flagged by NSA surveillance at the same time they were being run through the Iron Gate logistics chain. She looked at him. NSA knew about the network. Yes, Hale said, which is the part I couldn't figure out. Because if NSA knew, why didn't it surface? Why wasn't there an investigation? Why did Roe die and the network keep running? He paused. And then 8 months ago, I read that the new acting deputy director for clandestine operations at DIA had come over from a joint DIA-NSA coordination role. He looked at her. The same joint role that would have had access to NSA financial tracking records during the Iron Gate window. Sarah sat down, not with drama, because the full weight of what she was holding required her to be sitting. She looked at the paper in her hands, at the vendor codes and the routing sequences and the NSA tracking identifiers that meant this network had been visible to the right eyes at the right time, and the right eyes had chosen not to see it. He wasn't just managing the network, she said. He was protecting it from NSA exposure. He was inside both institutions simultaneously. She looked at Hale. That's why the archive query was flagged. That's why the Colorado Springs detail was soft. That's why Briggs could walk into this building with a visitor's badge and access to a current quarter hospital authorization. He had reach inside every relevant institution because he had spent years building it from the inside of 2 of them. Hale said nothing. He didn't need to. The arithmetic was visible to both of them now, and it was the same arithmetic, and it said the same thing in both directions. 10:22 a.m. Sarah's radio crackled. Reeves' voice from the corridor outside. Sarah, I need you out here right now. She folded the paper Hale had given her and put it in her left pocket with the 7 names and the hospital letterhead and her trauma shears. Then she looked at Hale. The FBI counterintelligence channel is active. Reeves has a parallel contact. You need to give her everything you just told me. The photograph, the NSA identifiers, the timing of the deputy director's joint role. She paused. And you need to be moved, not Colorado Springs. Somewhere Reeves chooses without routing it through standard channels. I know the protocol, he said. She moved to the door, stopped, turned back. When this is done, she said, when the list is closed and the network is dismantled and the deputy director's name is on a federal indictment, I'm going to find Jacob Roe. She held his gaze. Kevin's son, he's 11. He deserves to know that his father found something that mattered and tried to stop it, and that the people who stopped his father from stopping it are being held accountable. She paused. I'm going to tell him that myself. Hale looked at her. The expression on his face was not one she had a precise word for. It lived in the territory between recognition and something that was heavier than admiration and quieter than gratitude. The expression of a person watching someone carry a weight they had been carrying in the wrong direction, finally turn it around and carry it the right way. He'll want to know, Hale said simply. She opened the door. Reeves was in the corridor, phone in hand, and the younger agent was beside her, and both of them had the specific alertness of people who had just received information that had upgraded the status of an already serious situation. What happened? Sarah said. Reeves looked at her. The FBI counterintelligence contact I called 30 minutes ago, she said. The National Security Division. She paused. He just called back on the personal line. He said the moment I named the deputy director, 2 things happened. His supervisor's office was alerted, and within 4 minutes of that alert, the deputy director's DIA access credentials were used to query a specific classified database from a terminal inside the building. She held Sarah's gaze. He's not at home. He's not at a secure facility. He queried a database from inside Denver Memorial. Sarah went absolutely still. "He's in this building," Reeves said. Ghost pressed against Sarah's left leg. The low sound again, the one that was not an alert exactly, but was something more immediate than passive. The sound of an animal that had read the temperature of a space and had found it wrong. Sarah looked at the corridor, at the nurse's station, at the door to the stairwell, at the ceiling and the walls, and the ventilation panel with its temporary maintenance seal. "What database did he query?" she said. Reeves looked at her. "Personnel records," she said. "Specifically the employment file for a current Denver Memorial nursing staff member." A pause that lasted exactly 1 second. "Yours." Sarah looked at Reeves for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked at Ghost. Then she looked at the stairwell door at the end of the corridor. It was the same stairwell she had taken down to see Stowe an hour ago. The same stairwell Briggs had presumably used to access the second-floor conference room. The same stairwell that connected every floor of this building in both directions. She thought about a man with deputy director authority and 5 years of practice building institutional cover and a network that had survived a classified operation, 3 targeted killings, a DIA archive restriction, a compromised protective detail, and a failed device detonation on a Tuesday morning in March. She thought about what a man like that did when everything started to collapse. When the archive was being pulled, when Briggs was in custody, when the FBI counterintelligence channel was active, when the one person who had been inside Iron Gate with the EOD knowledge and the operational understanding to reconstruct the entire network was standing on the 9th floor of the building he was currently inside. She thought about the fact that he had queried her personnel file 4 minutes after being alerted that his name was in play. He wasn't running. He was coming to manage the problem directly, the same way Briggs had come to manage it. Because that was how this network had survived for 5 years. Not by running, by moving toward the exposure and containing it before it could propagate. "Lock the building," Sarah said. "Every exit, right now." She looked at Reeves. "And get Hale out, not in 5 minutes, now." Reeves was already on the radio before Sarah finished the sentence. "Building lockdown protocol, all exits, no exceptions, credentials required for any individual attempting to leave." Her voice was even and fast and carried the specific authority of someone who had been waiting for permission to act at full scale and had just received it. The younger agent went through the stairwell door at a run. Sarah looked at room 12. Through the window, Hale was already moving, already reaching for the wheelchair the orthopedic team had left beside the bed. Already doing the thing he did, which was to assess the situation and act on the assessment without waiting for someone to tell him the assessment was correct. Ghost read the shift in the corridor and pressed harder against Sarah's leg. "Go," she said to Reeves. "Get Hale out the East Service corridor. Ground level exit to the loading dock. Don't use the main stairwell and don't use the elevator." She paused. "And take Ghost." Reeves looked at her. "I'm not leaving you on this floor alone." "You're not leaving me alone. You're securing a Delta Force colonel who cannot walk without a wheelchair and is on an active target list." She held Reeves' gaze. "I can move faster without the dog, and I can think clearer without worrying about Hale. Get him out." Reeves made the decision in under 2 seconds. She pushed open the door to room 12. Sarah heard her voice, low and direct, telling Hale they were moving now. She heard Hale say one word, "Ghost." And she heard Reeves say the dog was staying, and Hale say that was not acceptable, and Reeves say they didn't have time for acceptable. Then the door opened, and Ghost came back into the corridor and stood at Sarah's left side and looked up at her, and she understood that Hale had made a decision about where the dog was most useful, and it was not in a wheelchair evacuation down a service corridor. 10:29 a.m. She looked at Ghost. "Okay," she said quietly, "you and me." She moved to the nurse's station. The charge nurse looked at her with the expression of someone who had been managing the aftermath of a serious incident for 2 hours, and had just been told it was not yet over. "I need you to move everyone on this floor to the East Corridor waiting room," Sarah said. "All patients who can be moved, all staff, quietly, do not use the PA system. Tell them it's a precautionary protocol." She paused. "And I need to know if anyone came through the north stairwell door in the last 15 minutes who you didn't recognize." The charge nurse looked at her for 1 second. Then she said, "A man in a gray suit. He showed a federal credential to the agent at the stairwell entry point, and the agent let him through. I assumed he was with your team." "Where did he go?" "He asked which room Colonel Hale was in." Sarah's hand went to the satellite communicator in her right pocket. She keyed it. "Reeves. We're in the service corridor, 30 seconds from the loading dock exit. Gray suit, federal credential? Ask the charge nurse for Hale's room. He's on 9. He came through the north stairwell." She paused. "He knows Hale is in 12. A beat. "We're moving faster," Reeves said. "Don't stop for anything." Sarah keyed off. She looked at the charge nurse. "East Corridor, everyone, now." The charge nurse moved. Sarah turned toward the north stairwell. Then she stopped. She thought about the deputy director, about a man who had spent 5 years building institutional cover so complete that it had survived 3 targeted killings, a congressional-level DIA authority, and a joint NSA coordination role. A man who had walked into this building with a legitimate federal credential and had it accepted by a trained agent at a stairwell entry point. A man who had queried her personnel file 4 minutes after his name was spoken on a parallel FBI channel. He hadn't come to this floor to find Hale. Hale was a target to be managed. He had come to this floor because her file was the one he had pulled, because she was the one who had reconstructed the network, because she was the one who had connected the NSA tracking identifiers to the vendor codes, to the clearance addendum authorization, to the deputy director's joint role. Because she was the specific problem that Briggs had been sent to assess and had failed to contain. He wasn't going to room 12. He was going to find her. She turned around and looked at the corridor behind her, and it was empty and quiet, and the fluorescent lights ran their low, continuous buzz, and Ghost made the low sound again, the one that was not quite an alert and not quite a growl, the sound of an animal running a constant environmental assessment and updating it in real time. "Where?" she said quietly, not to herself, to Ghost. Ghost turned his head, not toward the north stairwell, toward the supply corridor that ran behind the nurse's station, the service passage that connected the main 9th floor corridor to the medication storage room and the equipment bay and the secondary access point that most of the floor staff used to move carts and supplies without crossing through the patient area. The secondary access point that would not have a stairwell agent posted at it because it was a service passage, not a patient entry, and the building lockdown had been called 40 seconds ago, and 40 seconds was not enough time to cover every access point in a 9-floor level 1 trauma center. Sarah moved. Service corridor. Fast. Ghost tight at her left. The sound of her shoes on the floor absorbed by the ambient, mechanical noise of the building's infrastructure, the way sounds were absorbed in spaces that were designed for function rather than quiet. She came through the connecting door into the equipment bay and stopped. Deputy Director Warren Cahill was 53 years old, gray suit, the same unremarkable quality that Briggs had. The specific cultivated ordinariness of a man who had spent his career being the person in rooms who other people forgot was there. He was standing at the far end of the equipment bay with his back to the exterior wall and his eyes on the connecting door, which meant he had heard her coming and had positioned accordingly, which meant this was not a man who panicked in small spaces with limited exits. Ghost went rigid. "Nurse Calloway," Cahill said, not surprised, not performing calm. Actually calm in the way that was more unnerving than performance, because it was real. "I was looking for you." "I know," she said. 10:33 a.m. She assessed him the way she assessed every space she entered. Hands visible, right hand lower than the left by 3 inches, the natural drop of a right-handed person who was carrying weight on that side. Jacket cut to conceal. She could not confirm the carry from this distance, but she could confirm the cut and the drop, and the particular way he was holding his right elbow slightly away from his body, the habit of a person who was conscious of not compressing the holster. Ghost pressed against her leg and did not move and did not make another sound. The silence of an animal that had completed its assessment and was holding. "The folder is with DIA," she said. "The FBI counterintelligence channel is active. The NSA identifiers are documented. The vendor codes and payment routing from Irongate are in the hands of the National Security Division." She kept her voice flat and factual, the voice she used for things that needed to be delivered without interference from the emotional content underneath them. "There is no version of the next 30 minutes that ends with the network intact. That's not a threat, it's arithmetic." Cahill looked at her. He had the eyes of a man who had been making calculations longer than she had been alive, and who did not find the experience of having the calculation run back at him particularly destabilizing. "You've done impressive work this morning," he said, not condescending, genuinely informational. "Briggs told me you were fast." He underestimated what fast meant. "Briggs is in custody." "I know. Stowe is in custody." "I know that too." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not here to negotiate the network. I'm here because there is a component of the Irongate operation that is not in the documents you've reconstructed, and that cannot be allowed to surface through an FBI counterintelligence process without consequences that go significantly beyond me." He paused. Consequences for people who were not part of what Briggs was managing. People who were working in good faith inside a structure they didn't know was compromised. Sarah looked at him. "You're protecting someone." "I'm trying to manage an outcome," he said. "There's a difference." "Kevin Rowe didn't get a managed outcome," she said. The words came out flat and total. No rise, no performance. He got 33 years and a son and a procurement audit and a secondary trigger he didn't know was there, because the man who told him the perimeter was safe had written the assessment to make sure it wasn't. Something moved in Cahill's face. It was small and it was controlled, but it was there. The fractional register of a man whose calculation had been built on a foundation that included things he had not done himself, things he had allowed, things he had covered for, and who was now in a room where the specific human weight of those things was being named by a specific human person who had been carrying part of that weight for 5 years. "I didn't order Rowe's death," he said. "No," she said. "You ordered the conditions that made his death available as an option. And when Briggs exercised the option, you managed the investigation. You restricted the archive query. You ran protective surveillance on the remaining targets, while simultaneously positioning assets to neutralize the ones who got too close." She paused. "You built a system where the oversight layer and the threat layer were the same layer. That's not distance from Rowe's death. That's the architecture of it." The equipment bay was quiet. Somewhere above them in the building, the lockdown was running. Agents moving through stairwells, exit points being confirmed, the full procedural weight of a federal building containment unfolding floor by floor. Cahill could hear it. She could see in his face that he could hear it, and that he was running the time on it, and understanding that whatever he had come to this floor to accomplish had a window that was closing. 10:41 a.m. "The component you're protecting," Sarah said, "the thing that can't surface through the counterintelligence process. Tell me what it is." He looked at her. The calculation behind his eyes shifted. She had seen that shift before, in Briggs, in Stowe, in the figure on the corridor floor with his arm at the wrong angle. The shift of a person deciding that the position they had been holding was no longer defensible and choosing between two types of surrender, the kind where you controlled the terms and the kind where the terms were controlled for you. "There were 3 assets embedded in the network Rowe found," Cahill said. Not financial, human. 2 of them were ours. They went in as monitoring assets, and over 14 months, they became operationally compromised. Meaning the network recruited them, meaning they were passing intelligence in both directions by the time Rose Audit flagged the financial irregularities. He paused. If those names surface through an uncontrolled investigation, they will be tried as traitors. They will serve mandatory minimums. Their families will be destroyed. He held her gaze. They were 23 and 25 years old when they went in. They were not prepared for what they were inserted into. The failure was institutional, not individual. Sarah looked at him. She thought about 23 years old. She thought about a drainage ditch outside Fallujah and 8 inches of brown water and the specific weight of being exactly as old as the situation required you to be, and understanding that the institution that had put you there was not going to be accountable for what it asked of you. She thought about 2 people who were now however old, who had done something wrong inside a structure that had been designed by someone with far more power and far more experience to make wrong things possible and necessary seeming. She thought about Jacob Rowe, 11 years old. She looked at Cahill. Their names, she said, give them to Reeves, through the parallel channel, not as cooperating witnesses in a network prosecution, as assets who were institutionally compromised and are seeking formal debrief protection under the intelligence community whistleblower protection framework. She paused. That process is sealed. It doesn't surface in a public prosecution. Their families are protected. She paused again. And you give everything else, the vendor codes, the routing network, the funding destinations, the 5 years of post-Irongate activity, everything, completely, no negotiated omissions. He looked at her for a long moment. The calculation ran. She could see it running, all of it. The institutional exposure, the personal legal position, the weight of 5 years of managed cover against the specific gravity of standing in an equipment bay on the 9th floor of a hospital with a military working dog and a woman who had just named the architecture of his accountability out loud in a voice that did not waver. And me, he said. That's not mine to decide, she said. I'm a nurse. I render safe what I can render safe. What comes after that is someone else's job. She heard the stairwell door at the end of the service corridor open. Reeves's voice, calling her name, and then footsteps, 2 sets, moving fast. She kept her eyes on Cahill. He reached into his jacket. She tensed. Ghost tensed with her, the full, immediate readiness of an animal moving from held to active in a fraction of a second. Cahill produced a phone, held it out, screen facing her. The names, he said, the assets, they're in a protected file on this device. The decryption code is a 6-digit sequence I will give to whoever Reeves designates as the formal point of contact for the parallel channel. He looked at her. I'm not running. I'm not negotiating my personal outcome. I'm managing the only thing left that I can still manage. He paused. The people I put in harm's way. Reeves came through the connecting door with 2 agents behind her. She looked at Cahill. She looked at Sarah. She looked at the phone. Sarah looked at Reeves. He's cooperating, she said. Full disclosure. Start with the FBI counterintelligence contact on the personal line. He'll provide the asset names through the whistleblower protection channel. Everything else follows. She held Reeves's gaze. Everything else. Reeves stepped forward. She took the phone from Cahill's hand. She looked at him with the steady, direct attention of someone who had been building toward this moment for 3 incidents and 1 death, and the specific determination that the 4th incident would be the last. Turn around, she said. He did. 10:49 a.m. Sarah walked out of the equipment bay and into the service corridor and through the connecting door into the main 9th floor corridor. And she stood in the hallway that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee under fluorescent lights that buzzed their low, slightly wrong buzz. And she pressed one hand flat against the wall and felt the solid, specific weight of the building around her. And she breathed. Slowly, through her nose, Controlled. Not relief. Discipline. The way she had breathed after every render safe. The deliberate, measured exhale of a person who understood that the scene was never fully clear until every room had been swept, and every person accounted for, and every exit confirmed. Ghost sat beside her and pressed his shoulder against her leg, and she looked down at him, and he looked up at her, and she thought about the first moment of the first morning, 6:44 a.m. A dog assessing a person who had just walked to a door and clearing her, not as a nurse, but as a known category. She thought about what that meant, that the thing she had spent 4 years covering with a new name and a quiet life and a floor to clean gurneys on had never actually gone anywhere, had been visible immediately to the right kind of eyes. She thought about that as failure for a long time. She understood now that it was something else. 11:04 a.m. The east corridor had been cleared. Patients were being returned to their rooms by staff who were managing the situation with the careful, competent composure of people who had been trained for emergencies and were now performing one while also being human beings who would need several days and possibly several weeks to fully process what this Tuesday had been. Sarah watched them from the nurse's station. She watched the charge nurse coordinate, watched the med tech chart with slightly unsteady hands, watched a family member emerge from the waiting room and ask a question and receive an answer and sit back down. Ordinary machinery, reconstituting around the morning, the way water closed around a stone. Her pager went off. She looked at it. Not the charge nurse this time. Reeves. One line. Hale is secure. He wants to see you before we move him. She took the stairs, not because the elevator wasn't available, because she had been taking stairs since 7:58 a.m., and the habit of using the exits you could confirm was one of the ones that had kept her alive, and she wasn't changing it today. The loading dock entrance was at the rear of the building, and Hale was there in the wheelchair with 2 agents flanking him, and Ghost running ahead of Sarah and going directly to his handler and pressing against the wheel of the chair with the total commitment of an animal returning to the thing it had been oriented toward all morning. Hale put his hand on Ghost's head, looked at Sarah. Cahill, he said, in custody, cooperating. The asset names are going through the whistleblower protection channel. The full network disclosure is being processed by the FBI counterintelligence team. She paused. It's done. He held her gaze. Something in his face had the quality of a man arriving somewhere after a very long trip, not with drama, not with the visible performance of relief, just the specific stillness of a person whose body had finally received permission to stop running the calculations it had been running for a long time. Roe, he said. I meant what I said upstairs, she told him. When this is processed, when the indictment is public, I'm going to find Jacob. He nodded once, slowly, the nod of a man who understood that some things could not be undone and some debts could not be fully paid, and that what remained, what was always going to remain, was the work of making the outcome matter as much as the cost. You should come with us, he said. Reeves has a secure location. I know. She looked at the building, at the rear exterior wall, at the ventilation infrastructure, at the ordinary institutional architecture of a level 1 trauma center that had been something else entirely for 3 hours on a Tuesday morning and was now slowly becoming itself again. I have something to do first. She went back inside. 11:17 a.m. The administrative waiting area on the ground level. Stowe was still in the low chair, both agents still present. His phone had been confiscated, and the attorney had been called and was presumably en route, and Stowe was sitting with his hands on his knees, and the specific expression of a man who had spent a career believing that authority was a durable possession, and was now understanding that it was actually more like a rental, and the lease had just expired. He looked up when Sarah walked in. He looked at her, and he looked at the door behind her, and he looked back at her, and she could see him searching her face for something to work with, some leverage point, some version of the dynamic they had operated in since 6:44 that morning that still ran in his direction. There wasn't one. He could see that too. She reached into her left pocket. She took out the folded sheet of hospital letterhead, the removal order he had thrown at a coffee cup that morning and that had skidded across the counter and landed in a puddle while he walked away before anyone could respond. She unfolded it and set it on the table between them and smoothed it flat with one hand. "The dog stayed," she said. "I thought you should know." She walked out without looking back. 11:23 a.m. She stopped at the second-floor landing window on her way back up. Through the glass, she could see the small administrative waiting area below. She could see Stowe still in the chair, the cardboard box of personal items from his office on the floor beside him, the agents at the door. He looked up as she passed the window, and she did not slow, and she did not stop, and she did not give him the satisfaction of an expression. She simply walked past. Quietly, the way she had walked past him for 3 years. The difference was that this time, he was the one who had become invisible. She passed the maintenance seal on the ventilation panel at the north wall. She passed the nurse's station where the tech looked up and looked at her for a long moment with an expression that would take days and possibly weeks to fully resolve into something the brain could file. She passed the IV pole outside room 11, returned to its correct position. She passed room 12 with its empty bed and its stripped dressings tray and the specific quality of a space from which a presence had recently departed. She stopped at the end of the corridor, put her hand on the stairwell door, pushed. She thought about Kevin Rowe, about a 6-year-old who was now 11, who had grown up with a father-shaped absence in the center of his life, and deserved to know that the absence had not been arbitrary, had not been senseless, had been the consequence of a man who had found something that mattered, and had tried to stop it, and who had been failed, not by the people who loved him, but by an institution that had placed the survival of its own corruption above the survival of the people inside it. She thought about what she was going to say when she found Jacob Rowe. She had been thinking about it since she first saw the name on Hale's personnel file, since the moment in the second-floor conference room when the full shape of it became visible. She had been composing it the way she composed everything that mattered, before she needed it, not during. She was going to tell him the truth, not the classified version, not the official version, not the version that had been processed through 3 layers of institutional language until the human content had been extracted and what remained was a notification. The actual truth, that his father had been precise, that precision was a form of courage, that Kevin Rowe had sat with procurement documents in a forward staging area in eastern Syria and had looked at numbers that didn't add up and had understood that not adding up was not a clerical error, but a moral event, and had decided that moral events required a response even when the response was dangerous, even when the institution around you was the thing you were responding to. She was going to tell Jacob Rowe that his father had done the right thing, that it had cost everything, and that the cost had not been nothing, had never been nothing, would never be nothing, because 5 years later the people who made themselves invisible to pay that cost were still here and still working, and the network his father had found was being dismantled this morning on the 9th floor of a hospital in Denver by a woman his father had never met, who had been carrying part of his father's weight without knowing it, and had finally understood which direction to carry it. She pushed through the stairwell door. There were no more devices, no more figures in maintenance uniforms, no more files with her original name printed at the bottom of a list of targeted personnel. The building was locked, the network was exposed, the deputy director was in custody, and the parallel channel was active and moving at a speed that the institutional architecture Cahill had spent 5 years building was not going to survive. It was over. Not in the way that things ended cleanly in the versions of this work that people told each other afterward, with clear lines and complete accounting and nothing left unresolved. In the real way, The way things ended when you had done what you could do with the tools you had, and the time you had, and the specific knowledge that only you possessed, and had passed what remained to people whose job it was to carry it the rest of the way. At the ground level exit, she stopped, pushed the door open 2 inches, and felt the cold March air come through, and she stood in the gap between inside and outside, and she thought about the first render safe she had ever completed. 23 years old, in brown water, in a drainage ditch outside Fallujah, standing up and walking back to her team leader and saying one word: clear. The complete and total weight of that word, the way it contained everything, the 11 minutes of work and the 8 years of training, and the specific human fact of being exactly what the situation required at exactly the moment it required it. She pushed the door open. She walked out. The parking structure and the tree line and the pale March sky above Denver looked exactly as they looked on any ordinary Tuesday. No awareness of what had happened 9 floors above them. No record of the morning, of the dog who had known, of the woman who had remembered, of the weight that had been carried in the wrong direction for 5 years and had finally been turned around. Sarah Calloway walked into the cold air and let the door close behind her. Some people spent their whole lives learning what they were made for. She had known since she was 23 years old, in 8 inches of brown water with a device that could end everything and hands that did not shake. She had spent 4 years pretending she didn't know. She had spent this morning remembering. She was not lesser for any of it. She was not diminished by what the morning had cost, or what the 5 years before it had cost, or what the 14 months before that had cost. She was exactly herself, completely, for the first time in a long time, standing in the cold air of an ordinary Tuesday that was not ordinary at all. And she was already thinking about what came next. There were 6 other names on that list, and a network to dismantle, and an 11-year-old boy in whatever city he was in who deserved to hear the truth from someone who had been there. She had work to do.